Good morning and good afternoon. In the Zendo today we have Alex, Jack, Rain, Mavanui and myself, Neti. And on Zoom we have Emmy from Sydney, Mark from Pennsylvania, Anita in California and Pam in Canberra. So welcome. I wanted to speak a little today on the 8 consciousnesses model. It's a 4th, 5th century teaching in the Yogacara tradition through Vasubandhu and his brother Asanga. There's a set of verses called the 30 Verses by Vasubandhu, which describes the 8 consciousnesses. It's part of the mind-only school of Buddhism, and I'll show you the book that I've drawn a little bit from for today. It's called Inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara by Ben Connolly, who's a contemporary American Zen teacher. And this model is a very helpful way to understand ourselves and to understand other people. It's just a model, like it's not true. There's no thing called the 8 consciousnesses model that we could locate anywhere, but it is a way to make sense of appearances and experiences. And it's a very useful model. So we're all familiar with the 5 consciousnesses: our eyes that see appearances, which we call forms, people, events, clouds, chairs. The eye sees these things. The things that we see aren't exactly how they appear, but nevertheless, we can just call them forms. The ears hear what we call sounds. And it was interesting, during Zazen, the cockatoos were so raucous that the Zoom algorithm was thinking we were trying to say something, was telling us to unmute. It was popping up on the screen, you need to unmute. The cockatoos were so loud. So eyes, ears, nose. The nose smells, fragrances. We call them fragrances, we call them smells. What they are is something other than that, but that's what we call them. Our tongue tastes flavors. We call them flavors. They're not actually flavors, it's what we call them. And then our body, our skin, feels sensations. We call them sensations and we give them various names like hot, cold, burning, strong, soft, and so on. Painful, pleasant. And then across all Buddhist traditions, really, the 6th sense is described as mind. And this is the mind thinks thoughts. So it's a really helpful way to think of the mind as just a variation of like the eyes. It's just a thing, it's another organ that thinks thoughts, like eyes see objects. It thinks thoughts. And just like the objects that we see, they're not exactly what we think, and the thoughts that we have, of course, are often just wildly inaccurate. And somehow, remarkably, across a whole lifetime, we continue to believe them. Like we literally believe them over and over and over. So this model is actually to help us shift the way we relate to thoughts. And the thoughts, of course, are a result of the other five senses, like the five aggregates: forms, then the sensations, the perceptions, the formulations that we make, and the conscious thought that we then have. So they're the six that most people are familiar with. Then the seventh is called manas. And this is the sense that we have of a person who is experiencing the other six senses. The sense that it is me, Neti, sitting in the zendo, hearing the cockatoos. That sense of myself, that's manas. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more because it's very helpful to be aware of not just the sensations that are coming in through our senses, but to be aware that we have a sense of a self that is experiencing them. And by examining that sense of the self that experiences them, we can learn a lot about what causes our own suffering, and we can learn a lot about how we cause others to suffer and how the way they act, their sense of themselves influences the ways in which they suffer and do good in the world as well. And then the eighth sense is called the storehouse consciousness, or alaya vijnana. The storehouse consciousness is, it's not a storehouse, but we just call it that because we have to use words. It's all of the past experiences that have created impressions in our mind, and from those impressions we have created all sorts of meanings and interpretations, and those impressions, meanings and interpretations that we've created from the experiences plant seeds in the storehouse. This is the way it's described. Seeds are planted in the storehouse, karmic seeds, and those karmic seeds bear fruit, which is how we act in the world. And then that fruit that's born creates a new impression, and then that impression plants another seed. This is a way of looking at it. So I'll just read a little bit from Ben Conway's book. This is on manas, the sense of a self. The manas consciousness creates the sense that there is a self that experiences objects. In meditation, as the storytelling mind relaxes and we settle into the coming and going of phenomena, and he gives examples like the crying of gulls, and for us here it would be the cockatoos, the occasional sighs of the meditator next to us, the worrying about how soon the bell will ring. For me, it's more like worrying about how long are people waiting to get into the Zoom room. I worry. We often notice that there is a persistent aspect of mind that is a sense of experiencing things. In the early Buddhist teachings, one meditation adept called this the residual conceit. I want to talk about that phrase, the residual conceit, I am. Residual receipt that I am. Katagiri Roshi called it the observer, and said that this is one of the hardest things to let go of in meditation. This is manas, the sense that there is an I experiencing things. So it's interesting, this phrase, the residual conceit that I am. I like it because it's kind of very strong. To think that we truly exist as a separate entity is a conceit. It is so far from the truth. We exist profoundly in relationship. Our existence, just whatever this is, couldn't come to be without the profound support of everybody else. And I was just reflecting a little in Zazen this morning, just how here in this Zendo, Alex functions as both Jiko and Eno here. And there's these little things that he has to do all before and during the whole meditation for it to all run smoothly for everybody. Mavami has things to do so that it all runs smoothly. And they kind of can look invisible, these things that help us. There's all these invisible things that are helping us that we take for granted. But there they are, they're helping us to be and to appear to be separate, to be separate, but we're not. So it's a kind of a conceit, and it's residual conceit. I am. And Katagiri Roshi says it's the hardest thing to let go of in meditation. And my sense is that it is really so hard to let go of that maybe the easiest way isn't so much to try to let go of it specifically, but rather to expand the definition of ourselves so that it softens. So we can expand the definition of ourselves by just contemplating how interconnected we are with everything. And the more we do that, and that becomes actually our habit of mind, that's the seed that we plant, is the seed of interconnectedness. The more that we contemplate how interconnected we are, planting that seed bearing fruition, which is to feel more interconnected and to feel less separate, that cycle keeps on going around and around. We feel less separate. We get this impression that we're not. We plant the seed. The seed bears fruit that we feel connected. We feel more connected. We have that impression. We plant that seed. The seed bears fruit. We feel even more connected. And the more that we keep moving like that, the less we fall into the trap of feeling separate. And it's not that we won't fall into the trap momentarily or periodically. We probably will. We're most likely to do it when somebody else comes up in front of us who feels like a separate self themselves, and they think of us as a separate self. And they act in a way that's very pointedly at us as a separate self. When that happens in that moment, we're almost certainly going to return to that habit of mind of feeling like a separate self. And it's pretty usually a little unpleasant, and sometimes very unpleasant. As soon as we collapse into a sense of a separate self, we're more likely to be really self-conscious or defensive or scared. So this is manas. So one way to soften our sense of manas is to contemplate our interconnectedness. And another way in Zazen is to not identify with our thoughts. This is going in the other sort of direction, as sort of just a letting go of self-identification over and over and over. The thought comes in, you just let it pass. You don't think, this is me thinking this thought. This is what I think of my thought. The thought just comes, it just passes. Another thought comes, you just let it pass. You don't judge yourself for having thoughts because there's nobody really there to be judged. The thought comes, just let it pass. So that's another way to soften the seventh consciousness, is to not identify with the thoughts or any of the other sensations. not to identify too strongly with it as me that is hearing that sound. Just see if we can just focus more on the sound itself, just be more just aware of the experience without adding too much thought to the sense of the one who is experiencing it. And in Zazen, I think the easiest way is to just practice letting thoughts pass without not identifying with them. Oh, there was a quote here that someone just sent me the other day. Not in relation to this topic, but I thought it was a lovely kind of just a poetic way of imagining what it would be like to have less of manas, to have less of a sense of self. It's from Gil Fronsdale, who's an American Zen teacher. May we be the still point in the center of the wheel, free from the turning, free to support the turning, always allowing giving and receiving to roll on peacefully. Here's a lovely image of being the center point of the turning. The turning is happening, and we're the center point, free from the turning, but free to support the turning. I thought that was very lovely. I'll read a little bit about the eighth consciousness, the Storehouse consciousness, from Ben's book here. It's a few paragraphs. It'll take just a little bit to read it. The Storehouse consciousness is a way of describing how past conditions come together to form our present experience. We can think of it as an unconscious aspect of our life that colours, and I like this use of the word colours, that colours and is the basis for that of which we are conscious. It is where all the impressions of the past, our karmic seeds, are constantly involved in a process of transformation that our mind believes to be reality. This is such an important point. Our practice is to not believe ourselves. That's our practice. Not to believe ourselves. It doesn't mean that we don't function with provisional hypotheses, because we have to function, but we should just always remember they are provisional hypotheses. They're not reality. The concept of this aspect of consciousness is a model for understanding why we act the way we do, but most importantly, it addresses the issue of how we transform or let go of afflictive emotions. We can cultivate karmic seeds that are conducive to happiness and kindness through mindfulness and a gentle approach of letting go of harmful tendencies. Thus, we can transform the contents of the storehouse so that our unconscious tendencies to produce peace and so that our unconscious tends to produce peace and harmony rather than anxiety, aggravation, and dissatisfaction. Some people are more likely to be at ease, some more likely to worry and hurry, some more likely to shout and slam doors, and some more likely to laugh. The idea of a karmic storehouse provides an explanation for why this is so. The idea that our past profoundly influences our present is central to Buddhist thought. Karma, which means action in its simplest definition, is a complex concept and is treated and understood variously throughout Buddhist and other Indian literature. In this context, it means the process by which our past actions, intentions, and emotional states influence what we experience and do in the present, and how in the present they influence our future. The tendencies we have stored up in our alaya are known as karmic seeds. When they manifest in the present moment, they are known as karmic fruit. The results of our present moment intentions are known as impressions. Our impressions produce seeds, which produce fruit, which produce impressions, and so on. This process occurs in the storehouse consciousness, though we could also say that the storehouse consciousness is this process. So that last point, is this process, is pointing a little to that the storehouse is not an actual place. It sounds a bit like a pantry. But that's just the language that we use.
Karmic pantry.
Karmic pantry. So let's see what else I wanted to say. Yes. So our task, first of all, really is just to become open and curious about ourselves and about the storehouse pantry. Just be curious. What are my habits? What are my tendencies? Of course, there's parts of ourselves that we just can't see, and we need other people to point them out for us. This is why community is so important. We can't see everything in ourselves, but we can see some things. We can notice our tendencies. I used to have a strong tendency to be very worried about being late. Now I just am fairly punctual, and I don't worry too much. I worry a tiny bit about being late, but I used to worry a lot. Just by noticing, reflecting on how harmful that was to me, how it didn't benefit anybody, that I would get so kind of fretful about being late, it didn't benefit anybody. It actually was harmful to me and therefore meant I was less beneficial to others. By just reflecting on that over and over, practicing being kind of just on time more often rather than early, slowly, I changed that quality in myself. So that's just a very simple example. And we can work with the simple ones and move along to the more difficult ones. You know, we're training ourselves. But part of that curiosity is not about judgment. I think if we trust that as practitioners, we just need to really be aware. That's the main task, be aware of what's kind of bubbling up from the storehouse. We just be aware that it will start to move towards something more wholesome. We can trust that. The natural movement is towards wholesomeness if we're truly curious. I've never seen someone be truly curious and then decide to get worse. It just doesn't seem to go in that direction. So that's really all we have to do. We don't have to fix anything. We don't have to get rid of anything, but we do need to be genuinely open and curious. And then it will change itself. So I think I'll stop at that point to see if there's any very last thing I wanted to make sure. And we're just saying goodbye to Jack, who has to head off to pick up mother from the airport. Oh, yes, so the other side of this, which I'll just say briefly because of time, is it's not just our own storehouse that we're wanting to plant positive, beneficial seeds. We can ask, can I say or do something that will plant a wholesome seed for someone else? Well, not that exactly we would plant that seed, but can I say or do something that will result in the other person having an impression, and the impression they have causes them to plant a seed? We can ask ourselves that, and we can function that way as bodhisattvas. That is actually what we're called to do, to function in a way that others are inspired to plant wholesome karmic seeds for themselves. This is the other side, and we'll give a whole talk just on this other side. But everything in the first half that I said about in relation to ourselves, we can just apply to our relationship to others. We can plant karmic seeds, or not create impressions so that karmic seeds are planted in others on a one-to-one basis, but we also do it in our wider community, in just how we function in our community, what we write, what we say, how we move, what we buy, what we wear, how we vote. All of these things are creating impressions. So it's everything that we do. All right, so I think I'll stop there and see if anyone would like to comment or ask a question in the Zendo or on Zoom.